And I noticed like as he got older and he would have temper tantrums and he would melt down and he would be emotionally dysregulated, I would find myself doing those very things right alongside him. If you leave with nothing else from this part of the conversation, it's that phrase, I wonder. There's just so much softness in it and there's no judgment, and it just opens up space for possibility and for collaboration. So it's just kind of being a really compassionate detective and again, seeing what's underneath of behavior and teaching them the skills so they can do a better job next time. Gentle parenting tends to get a worse rap because it tends to get lumped in with permissive parenting. So I do want to make that distinction. Like often people hear gentle and they think permissive.
You also talk a lot about breaking intergenerational trauma.
You can celebrate and be grateful for the things your parents did get right. And then you can also acknowledge that none of us got out of childhood unscathed, whether it was from our parents or our teachers or our coaches or other adults in our lives. We all left with some probably level of wounds, right? And just acknowledging that that's just part of life, and reparenting ourselves and raising ourselves is about tending to those wounds so that we're not passing on the hot potato of pain to our kids, right?
Hi, and welcome to Kidsy Connects. Today, I am so excited to be chatting to Shelly Robinson, our next guest on our show. Shelly is a certified conscious parenting coach. She's the founder of Raising Yourself and the creator of the Connected Kid Toolkit. Shelly, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I do have to say that I've been following you for some time. And I think what really stands out to me about the work that you've been doing and the way you've been helping and supporting parents through their parenting journey has not only been incredibly insightful and helpful, but I love the approach that you're taking, because I think when so many people become parents for the first time, the focus is so much about raising our children and how do we raise them and what are the tools we need to give them. But you spend a lot of your work and your time focusing on how parents can actually raise themselves through this process as well. I'd love to dig into that. And if you don't mind sharing with me, like, what does raising yourself look like for parents?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm so glad to have you in the community, and I appreciate you having made that observation, because I think that is such a little bit of a different take on parenting. At least for me, I had my first child 15 years ago almost, and I remember thinking when he was born, like I was going to be in charge and I was going to lay down the law and it was going to be, that sort of style of parenting. And I noticed like as he got older and he would have temper tantrums and he would melt down and he would be emotionally dysregulated, I would find myself doing those very things right alongside him. And it was kind of this shock, like, wait a minute, if I'm expecting him to be able to do these things and develop these skills, like, shouldn't I have to do that first so that I can lead the way? And I know that sounds really obvious as I'm saying it out loud, but I don't think that's really been the narrative for parenting for so many of us. That's not how a lot of us were raised. So raising ourselves alongside our kids, to me, means owning and embodying the very things that we're asking of our children. So if we're asking our kids to like manage their screen time well, we got to learn to do that for ourselves. There's so many things I could list, right? But it's really just about owning like our role in the relationship and staying in alignment and having integrity with what we're asking of our children.
Yeah, because kids are really like parrots, right? Like they parrot everything we say. And it sounds like they're also parroting the behavior as well. So is the reason because you have to just show them the actions in order for them to emulate it?
That's definitely one of the reasons. I think the second reason that comes to mind for me is that the word I want to say, the word I want to use is hypocrisy, right? We do not want to be hypocritical. We want to walk our talk, right? And there have been so many times in my house where my kids feel safe calling me out. So if we're cultivating an environment, if we're raising our kids in a type of home where they're allowed to respectfully point out when we're a little bit out of alignment as parents, then we are inevitably going to have to walk our talk, right? So that just happened with me this week. I got into like a little bit of a heated debate with my son, who's 14. He and I were kind of debating about screen time and guardrails around that. And he was really disagreeing with my point of view. And I got very triggered by that. And he said, you say that I'm allowed to have a different point of view than you, and I'm just offering that, which he was. He wasn't being disrespectful. And he's like, I can just see in your face that you are extremely angry with me right now. And I was like, I'm telling him out of one side of my mouth, I'm saying, yeah, you can have a different opinion than me. And then he has a different opinion than me. And I get a little bit triggered and activated by that. So I think it's that staying in alignment and staying in integrity of, asking our kids to do something and then being able to do that thing ourselves.
Yeah, I love that word hypocrisy, because you're right. Like, same rules don't always apply.
Yeah.
For parents and children. You also talk about a lot about breaking intergenerational trauma.
Right.
And I think that's so powerful, because so many of us have come from such different walks of life
Right.
and backgrounds and experiences, and may not have always grown up in perhaps the best or the safest or the most nurturing of homes.
Right.
Yet I have yet to meet a parent that isn't trying to do better or be better the second time around for their children.
Right. Yeah.
And how do people navigate that? Like, because it sounds like, so logical, like breaking the cycle and breaking the trauma.
Yeah.
But there's a ton to unpack there on such a personal level.
Yes. So there are two things that come to mind when you mention that. So for me, and I suspect a lot of people may relate to this, it's a little bit tricky if you grew up in a home where your parents did get a lot of things right, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you don't want to, just think that they did all things bad and wrong. So I know for me, when I first started inner child work and reparenting myself, I felt a little bit bad because my parents did so many wonderful things, but there were things that they were simply doing and repeating that their parents had done, right? That I did not want to pass on to my own children. So I had to kind of wrestle with acknowledging that there's nuance in this process of saying you can celebrate and be grateful for the things your parents did get right. And then you can also acknowledge that none of us got out of childhood unscathed, whether it was from our parents or our teachers or our coaches or other adults in our lives. We all left with some probably level of wounds, right? And just acknowledging that that's just part of life. And reparenting ourselves and raising ourselves is about tending to those wounds so that we're not passing on the hot potato of pain to our kids, right? So that's one piece of it. Just embracing that nuance and not making it about a black and white, like my parents are bad, my parents are good, just acknowledging that we all have some level of wounding that we're working with. And then the second thing is breaking cycles is hard, because our brains got wired and conditioned to believe, about how parents parent, right? So it got wired into us, whether we intellectually agree with it or not. Somewhere in our psyche, we were told that that's the way you do it. So if you were raised to believe that spanking was how you disciplined, or timeouts, or the silent treatment, or whatever, you grow up to be a parent and you don't want to pass it on to your kids, but then your kids trigger you, and what happens? Your brain kind of has a reflex and says, I'm going to give them the silent treatment. That's what I got. You don't want to do that, but there's that messiness inside of that tension and that tug of war of I don't want to pass that on, but that's all I knew because that's all I grew up with. And I say that to just acknowledge that that's okay. That doesn't make you bad or wrong. That just makes you someone who is truly trying to overwrite those patterns with a new way of being. And that takes time and it takes courage, and it's just a little bit messy.
I'd love to talk about giving people tangible advice or tips or strategies in which they can do that. And I'm also cognizant that in asking for these strategies, I do realize there's no quick fixes.
Sure.
Especially when you're working through wounds that are so deep and do stem from childhood. But say if someone has grown up in an abusive environment, or, in a home where there was a lot of neglect, or there was perhaps emotional, verbal, physical abuse even.
Yeah.
And now they're becoming parents for the first time. What are some things they can actively start doing to help break away from those old patterns?
Yeah. I'm going to give you 3 steps that are just jumping to mind right now for me. The first one is connecting with that younger part of yourself that was wounded and letting them know, however you want to do that, whether it's just in your mind, on a piece of paper, whatever feels right for you, that they deserved better than that, right? I think as children, when we are punished or abused in some way, we know nothing other than we think that we deserve that. Like we did something to get that kind of treatment. And so when we grow up, we have the opportunity to kind of go back in time and say, hey, I saw that you went through all this pain and you didn't deserve that. So that's part of the inner child reparenting work. That's hard. It's hard to go back and do that and look at those wounds and confront that. But to me, that's really the foundation for this work. The second thing is, once you've set that intention and you know that you don't want to pass it on to your children, whenever you get something right, I just want you to celebrate that victory. Because I know I do this, and I know that a lot of parents struggle with this. We're very hyper focused on what we're messing up, right? And when we're making mistakes, and there's this soundtrack in my head, I'm going to screw up my kids. They're going to end up worse off than me. All of the things that inner critic says to us when we make mistakes as parents. And that just perpetuates that behavior, right? Just if we were criticizing our kids about what they're not getting right, we're going to see more of that. It works the same for us. So I would invite you, I do this as a practice before I go to bed now. I just celebrate 3 to 5 things and I'm like, nice job, Shelly. You did a good job. Like biting your tongue that day. Even if you said nothing, even if that was the victory and you just held your tongue, celebrating the wins is huge because that just really amplifies your ability to do more of that. And then the third thing is forgiving yourself, offering yourself compassion when you don't get it right, because inevitably we're all going to mess up, right? I mess up every single day. And if I sat there and beat myself up for hours on end, which I have done before, it just puts you in that kind of like negative state where your kid's going to come up to you and ask for a snack and you're going to snap at them because you're sitting there beating yourself up inside, right? So just to kind of recap that, connecting with your younger self, celebrating your wins, and offering yourself forgiveness and compassion when you don't get it right.
I love those strategies because I feel like parents are often so hard on themselves.
Yeah.
You're navigating so much, and there is this pressure to not screw it up and to get it right. And there's a ton of judgment that you're passing on to yourself. But I've also noticed that parents get a lot of judgment from the external world as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressures to do certain things and create these like Pinterest perfect moments at home, which is not reality. So, I mean, have you noticed that in your work as well, that in addition to the judgment we pass on ourselves, there's a lot of this external judgment that we're also navigating?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to breaking those generational cycles, right? Because we are possibly, very likely bumping up against grandparents or in-laws who do not see eye to eye with us. And so this is just yet another layer of the work where that people-pleasing part of so many of us, right? We don't want to confront them. We don't want to have to stand our ground with the way we parent because that feels really uncomfortable for us. But that's just, again, another like layer of this work where we have to learn how to stand up for ourselves and not only advocate for our kids, but advocate for ourselves. And it's okay if you're not there yet, right? Because it does take time, and that's just one of the many pieces of the puzzle that falls into place when you've done some of the other foundational work, which is like the inner child work, learning to celebrate yourself, forgiving yourself, but it all eventually kind of comes together.
I have one last question on breaking the intergenerational trauma. So much of what we do is so reactive in parenting. We're like doing something in a split second, realizing it a second later, and then sharply trying to course correct after that. But say you're a new mom or dad and you know you're expecting. I always hear so much about like all the preparation and the work that goes into like building the beautiful nursery and buying all the perfect toys and, the wallpaper. But I love this conversation because you never hear about like, well, what about all the other work that goes into parenting besides like prepping that nursery? So for anyone who's about to be a new parent, what are some things they could do before they welcome this child into their lives that could really set them up for some sort of success?
Yeah. Oh, what a good question. I love that you are focusing on before the child is born, because you're right. A lot of us, including myself, I just read about this a couple of days ago, only read what to expect when you're expecting, right? The book that everyone reads, and I was like, why aren't there any books, and maybe there are now, because I read that 15 years ago, any books around like your inner child and reparenting and making sure that you're going to give to your child what you deserved as a child. So to answer your question, what I think would be an absolutely beautiful thing for an expecting parent to do, if they have the energy and if they're not nauseous and, like they have to take care of themselves first. But I think it would be really lovely to find a picture of yourself as a child at an age that means something to you, right? And just spend however much time you can muster up, a few minutes a day, a few minutes a week, just writing down the things that little you deserve that you didn't receive. And again, that's not to say you didn't get some wonderful things from your parents. But again, all of us left childhood like needing some more. And just acknowledging that and making sure that you're intentional before your child is born, like, I'm going to give that to them. I deserve that and they deserve that. And it's really how this work comes full circle. And it's so healing. And so it's not only benefiting the child to come, but it's also healing little you in the past. And it just allows you to work from such a much more solid, healed foundation.
You talk a lot in your work about conscious parenting. And I love that that's the term that, you've coined along with others who have really been champions of this conscious parenting movement. What is conscious parenting? Like, how do we define that? And how is it different to traditional parenting?
I think how I would define that is just our ability to cultivate awareness about our own reactions to our children, right? So when our children do something and we're activated by that, instead of, projecting on them and blaming it on them, it's taking radical responsibility for our reactions and figuring out what's behind the scenes, what's going on underneath the hood of the car, right? Instead of projecting the blame onto the child. And if I could just sum that up in a much more neat and tidy way, I would just say it's about being humble. I mean, that's when someone asks me to describe parenting in a nutshell, it's about being humble. Because if we can't acknowledge what our role is and the friction that comes up with our children, then they're always going to feel like the scapegoat and that they're the problem and that they're the ones that are wrong and bad.
One of the things that I think is often quite challenging as we navigate parenting, and there's a lot of challenges, it has its beautiful moments and its like peaks, but it also has its valleys, is how do you start really connecting with a child that is showing some sort of, and I use this term lightly, like troubling behavior, right?
Yeah.
Either they are having anger issues, or they're having trouble regulating their emotions, trouble expressing themselves, and they're just lashing out. How does conscious parenting, like, what are the tools there that you can apply in those moments?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that we can embrace is our curiosity. So instead of, assuming judgment or wrongness or badness in our child, which is kind of the default, right? If we were raised that way and if we were on the receiving end of that, it makes sense that that would be your default with your child. And I want to just really make sure parents understand that doesn't make you wrong or bad. You're just kind of repeating what was done to you, right? But this is when we become conscious and say, I don't want to make my child wrong and bad. I don't want them to feel judged and criticized. I want to get curious about what is underneath that troubling behavior. Because if we think about ourselves as adults and we're the ones lashing out and we're the ones being snippy and we're the ones like biting everyone's heads off in the kitchen because they're annoying us, it's not because we're wrong or bad, right? There is something going on under the surface. Maybe there's financial stress. Maybe there's, something going on in the world that's bothering you. But there's always something underneath the troubling behavior. And it's that right there that needs the tenderness and the compassion and the, gosh, what is going on? And often for children, it's a fear. There's a lot of fear underneath of their anger. And so if we can view our children in that way, it's so much easier for us to be kind and loving and patient when we see that they're afraid of something, right? They're afraid of being disconnected from us. They're afraid of maybe being bullied at school. It could be a number of things. But if we can get it at that level, our odds for being kind and compassionate go up so much higher.
I love how you frame that, to start looking at it from this behavior is stemming from a place of fear or insecurity rather than from a place of like badness or
Yeah.
malintent. Because so much of parenting, and I think life as well, it's like the stories you tell yourself and
Yeah.
the narrative or the talk track you have running in your head is really what's always coming out.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think our ability to do that with our children starts with our ability to do that with ourselves, right? So if we're grumpy and we're cranky and we're lashing out at other people in our home, we have to be able to say, whoa, that's not who I am. Like, what is going on with me? And instead of, kind of flicking all that anger and rage that we have onto other people, it's our willingness to say, I need a break. I need to like get off my phone. I don't want to, instead of going to our coping mechanisms like our phones or our drinks or our food or whatever it is that we're numbing ourselves with, just learning to be with that discomfort and saying, I wonder what's going on for me. And when we can say, I wonder what's going on for me, we can also say, I wonder what's going on with my kid. So if you leave with nothing else from this part of the conversation, it's that phrase, I wonder. There's just so much softness in it and there's no judgment, and it just opens up space for possibility and for collaboration.
I love that. I love how you framed it. How does conscious parenting get applied to discipline? Because there's so
Yeah.
many ways in which, and discipline is inevitable as part of like raising children because you have to somewhere along the way show them boundaries and
Right.
actions have consequences. But is there a way you can do that that still allows you to set the tone for, hey, actions have consequences, yet I'm still going to do this in a very connected way? Like, what does that even look like?
Yeah, I love that question. So I think we can look at that through the same lens we just looked at the thing you described, like with the emotional dysregulation, or if they're doing something, they're throwing plates across the kitchen. We can say, I wonder what's going on. And so it depends on a lot of things, right? It could be like a developmental skill. Like, are we expecting our 2-year-old unload the dishwasher and they're not doing it? And we could say, well, that's a skill that they don't have yet. So maybe we could start with something a little easier. That's a silly example, but it's just that I wonder, like, do they have that skill yet? And if they don't have that skill, then it's my job to be the leader and the guide and to teach them that skill, to model that skill, to work on that skill in a connected, collaborative way instead of a shaming and like critical way. So the developmental piece of it is huge, just knowing what they are capable of doing. It could just be like, are they emotionally dysregulated? And if they are, again, it is my job as the parent to be the guide and the leader to teach them when they are dysregulated how to manage that. And that's going to be a huge range, right, between like a 2-year-old and a 15-year-old. But it's just knowing our children and knowing, did they have their nap today? Have they eaten lunch? Like, it's part of just knowing them and kind of knowing what sets them off and paying attention to them. And in that knowing them, we can say, gosh, you know what? I don't think you've had a snack yet today. Could that be it? So instead of them making them wrong or bad, they just haven't had their afternoon snack. So it's just kind of being a really compassionate detective. And again, seeing what's underneath of their behavior and teaching them the skill so they can do a better job next time, right? Instead of punishing them, which doesn't really teach them anything other than to like hide their mistakes better from you next time, you're going to teach them the skill that they missed, right? So I'll give you an example, like with my 2 kids who are 9 and 14, if they get into a fight or if they're arguing about something or someone threw a toy at someone's head, that doesn't happen as much now that we have a 9 and 14-year-old, but it still happens sometimes. But it's that, this conflict happened. And what is so hard about walking past your sister that you can't flick her and you can't help yourself but flick her in the head? We're going to actually practice walking by your sister and you're not going to touch her. And we're going to keep working on that. And I know that sounds like a really silly thing, but that's what we're asking them to do. And then if they have an argument about that, the next thing is we have in our house what we call communication station. And they learn the skill of talking to each other without interrupting and without judgment and solving the problem. And I'm kind of there as the mediator if I need to be. But it's that skill of conflict resolution that they're not going to learn when they're just sent to their own rooms and punished and forced to be in isolation. So it's just a lot of modeling and teaching and guiding and being a compassionate detective so you can be their guide and be on their team instead of being their dictator who they're afraid of.
Is conscious parenting similar in many ways to gentle parenting? Are those terms interchangeable? because you hear of both. And I
Yeah.
think just to create some like, clarity in what
Yeah.
those different styles are.
I don't know if I have a very clear like differentiation between the two. I tend to lump those two together. However, having been in this space for 5 years or so now, gentle parenting tends to get a worse rap because it tends to get lumped in with permissive parenting. So I do want to make that distinction. Like often people hear gentle and they think permissive and letting kids walk all over you and like
Do
roll the
whatever they
roost.
want.
And
Yeah.
so that's really all I would want to say about those two terms is I tend to steer away from it because if you're paying attention to like the online temperature of that word gentle, it just gets a worse rap than conscious parenting for some reason. And I think it's just because it's the word gentle, but it also I think is kind of a testament to the fact that it's too bad that word I think that says a lot about our society that gentle equals weakness when it really doesn't. You can be gentle and you can be firm. So it's your ability as a conscious parent to like hold space for both of those things, knowing they can coexist without you getting walked all over.
Yeah, that's so true because you're right. Like I think the assumption or the myth is often that gentle parenting or conscious parenting means that you're going to let this kid run wild and run circles
Right.
around you. But
Right.
there is a way to still be firm and
Yeah.
and be the disciplinarian or the so-called authority while still giving them space to navigate whatever it is that they are navigating.
Right. Yeah. And, that brings up something that I thought of, and I certainly didn't come up with this term, but I don't know if you've heard of pendulum parenting, where if you grew up with like really strict parents who are really harsh, then sometimes the temptation is when you become a parent, you don't mean to, you wouldn't necessarily think this like consciously, but you end up becoming permissive because you want to move so far away from what you grew up with, you do the polar opposite. So it's always when people find themselves in that permissive parenting kind of approach, again, we're not going to make those parents wrong or bad. It's just that that's an outcome of a wound that they're probably dealing with. And so when you work with your inner child and you get to know younger you can often come to your own conclusion and be like, oh, I can see that I struggle to set boundaries because setting boundaries for me equals my parents who are really strict and rigid, and I don't want to be like that. But there's this beautiful middle ground that we're all trying to get to, and where none of us is doing it perfectly. But you can be again gentle, firm, and compassionate without harming your child and without letting yourself be bulldozed by your kids.
You talked about being bulldozed by your kids. I know a lot of parents are also navigating this like bulldozer syndrome with some of their own parents who now have occupied the role of grandma or grandpa,
Yeah.
and even with their in-laws who perhaps have their own vision and own ideas about how they want this grandchild to be raised. What sort of advice or strategies can you offer these parents who are perhaps navigating their own parents and their own in-laws and extended family members who don't see eye to eye with their style?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is advocate for your child first. It is your job to make your child, really proud of you for how you advocated for them when they couldn't advocate for themselves. So your parents are no longer the top priority. And so that when you say that and when you think of it that way, it makes it a little bit easier to hold boundaries with your parents or your in-laws and confront them in ways that you need to confront them. But really, it's about advocating for yourself too. And so this is almost an opportunity if you weren't able to do that as a child because of how your parents treated you. It's again, full circle work where you're saying, you know what, I've got this. I am a grown up now. I have the tools, I have the skills, I have the resources to stand up for myself and hold my ground. And I'm going to do that not only for my child, but also for little me. And setting the boundary. And if it gets bulldozed, then, then that's when those hard conversations have to happen. Like you have to decide what works for your family. Will you allow them to see your child without your supervision? All those kind of like messy, nuanced things that have to take place and have hard conversations around. But it's okay to advocate for your child and it's okay to advocate for yourself. And that's something that really has to just like sink in deep for us because that doesn't maybe feel true right at the beginning.
You've created the Connected Kid Toolkit. Can you talk to us about what that entails?
Oh yeah, I would
And
love
what
to.
that looks
Yeah.
like? Yeah.
So I created that a couple of years ago, and it started out as just kind of this fun project because I was thinking about all of the things I thought not only children should hear, but like our inner children should hear. So I just started brainstorming and jotting down on paper all of these phrases that I wish everyone could hear growing up. And I truly believe in my heart, if we heard these things on a regular basis, the world would look so different. So I started jotting them down, and the further I got along into this process, I thought, gosh, this is really cool. I wonder if these could be little conversation cards. So they turned into conversation cards, but I wanted to make sure parents didn't just read them to their kids and then like go about their day. So I created a lot of activities that help bring those things to life. Like, there's nothing you could do to make me stop loving you. You don't have to earn your love. You don't have to earn my love. All of these different sayings. And I wanted there to be activities that parents could do so that the kids felt it. Like, they didn't just hear it, but they like felt it deep in their soul. And then I created a reparenting workbook for the parents to answer and go through a lot of journaling prompts that relate to the cards, because I know when I made these and when I started sharing them with people in like their draft form, parents got really like choked up and emotional, and they were like, it's bringing up a lot of stuff for me reading these to my kids. It's really hard. And so the journal, the workbook, is really meant for the parents to be like a soft landing place to jot down some of those kind of like ouchy, touchy things that come up for them when they are able to give that to their child, but it's not something they receive themselves. So I really wanted something. It was so important for me to have the parents equipped with something that really helped them heal parts of their own childhood. And I just finished creating an app that's now available. So that's really fun. So now you can like have it in the doctor's office and have it on the go. So yeah, thank you for asking.
What's the app called?
It's the Connected Kid app. It's exactly what I described. It's just in digital format now, and there are a few countries we can't ship to, so it allows people throughout the world to get it if you can't get the physical cards. But anyone, if you get
download it online and do exactly what the physical product allows you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I love that because, in the market, I always see so many, and I actually bought a gratitude journal at the start of this year.
Okay.
Just something that, I thought so much of my day is always consumed with problem solving, and whether it's putting out fires at work or at home or with my kids. And I thought, I'm always in this like problem solving mode,
right?
That I never take a moment, unless I remember to really be thankful and have gratitude for all the things that did go right, which you briefly talked upon as well.
Yeah.
And so this gratitude journal allows me to do that. But it's funny that not too much of my parenting stuff goes in it. Like, I might feel gratitude for like an activity I did with my kid, or the time I got with them today, but there's no gratitude prompt or story about parenting. So I love that you've created this.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like we're just always putting out fires as parents, as business owners. And it's really, I'm in the same boat as you, where I really have to force myself to be like, I'm going to pause and just feel like all of the blessings that happened today that I'm not even paying attention to because I'm already on to the next thing. So yeah, whether it's a gratitude journal or if it's more related specifically to the parenting, I think I like to call them emotional cha-chings, right? So we're always focused on like our financial bank account, but like our emotional bank account can go bankrupt too, right? We can be in debt. And so when we're putting those down on paper, it really fills us up so that we just have more to give. And we're not in that scarcity mindset of like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not checking off enough boxes, because I tend to do that. I tend to get in this like, oh, I haven't gotten enough done today. And it doesn't put me in a very good mood. And then I'm grumpy and cranky to everyone.
Gosh, that is so good. Emotional debt. Because you're right. You hear about like financial debt, and you even hear a little bit about sleep debt. Like, oh, I didn't get my 8 hours last night. I'm in sleep debt. But emotional debt, what does that mean to you? Like, that word?
Yeah. I mean, I think it creates like our whole vibe, our energy, right? When we're in emotional debt, when we're in this place of like not enoughness, it just exudes, it spills out over onto everyone. And whenever I am rude and cranky with my kids, I mean, sometimes maybe it's because they're like playing the flute too loudly or something's going on, but mostly it's me. It's like I am the one in a grumpy mood because I am focused on what I don't have enough of. Like, I didn't check enough things off my list today. Not enough of this, not enough of that. I'm not where I want to be, and it spills out all over everyone. So when we're in emotional debt, we're in just this constant state of not enoughness.
I know I'm going to definitely go check out your Connected Kid Toolkit. I encourage others to do the same. But if you could just give me like 2 or 3 prompts from the toolkit that you have seen be extremely powerful, whether it's been, extremely helpful or
Yeah.
moved someone in a really big way? What are some of those prompts so we can start thinking about them?
Yeah. So the one that jumps out to me is, what did little you need as a child that you didn't get, that you can now give to
Mm,
yourself as an adult? Was it
wow, that's good.
forgiveness? Was it a lack of judgment? Like what did you not get that you can now? Because the good news is, what I feel so hopeful about is that just because you didn't get it in childhood doesn't mean you can't give that to yourself as an adult. And that's kind of where our inner parent comes into play. That's where we're reparenting ourselves. And another one that we haven't touched on a whole lot, but there are 6 different categories, and one of them of the 6 is bodily autonomy. And there's journal prompts, of course, on that. And one of them is, what did you need to know about your body as a child that you can give yourself as an adult today? And I know a lot of parents, particularly moms, there's a lot of, I wish I would have known that my body was just okay, beautiful and wonderful exactly as it was. A lot of parents and moms grew up with really critical moms about their bodies being too much or too big or not the way their moms wanted them to look. So a lot of it is just finding beauty in your body again, or finding safety in your body. And so there's a lot of prompts along those topics that help you to feel safer in your own body. So that's a big topic in that journal prompt.
So you answer this for yourself.
Yes.
And then what are the ones you're answering or doing? Like, what are some 1 or 2 prompts that you're then doing with your child?
Okay.
And
So
how young can you start this with your kids?
yeah, I usually recommend age 4.
Hmm.
All of the activities are absolutely appropriate for age 4. I think at around age 13, I think the cards should be like for every human being, any age. The activities, I would say, if you have a teenager, they're probably going to turn their nose up a little bit at you. So you might have to either adapt those or change them a little bit, or just not do them at all. But some of the activities, for the kids, I'll share one that's like great for any age. And I still do this to this day. And I have a 14-year-old and a 9-year-old, but it's Kids Appreciation Day. And so you can do this as frequently as you want. It doesn't have to cost money. It can cost a little money. It's like totally up to you. But we carve out every 3 months or so a day where we surprise them. It's not as surprising anymore because we've done it for so long, so they're kind of expecting it. But we just honor the kids and celebrate them, and we write down things that we specifically appreciate about each one. We might go do a fun event. We don't make it an expensive thing, but it's just really like celebrating the kids and letting them know that they matter, because there's a Mother's Day and a Father's Day, and there's all these other days. And that one's really fun for us. And it's something that our kids continue to really love. Another one that's really fun is, this requires, if you have it, some paper at home where you cut out like a cutout of your kid's body, you put it on a door, and they write down all of the things they love about themselves, and they hang it on like their bedroom door. And we did that for a couple of years, and it would just, they'd walk in their door and see like, oh, I love my sense of humor. I love like my eyes. I love that I'm kind. And so it's just kind of mirroring back their own goodness and the things that they love about themselves. And that's another one of my favorites.
It's interesting that you're having the kid write this about themselves
Yeah.
rather than the parent doing it for them
Yeah.
or about them.
Right.
Why is that piece important?
Well, I think they're both important, actually. So like the kids' celebration day or appreciation day is where we as the parents have the opportunity to show them what we see in them. Like we see all these different things, their courage, their kindness, but then I do want them to cultivate their own inner goodness and know about that and call it out and name it so that they can be that in the world, right? So I think it goes both ways. It's good for the parents to call it out, and it's good for the kids to call it out, because it just reinforces those qualities about themselves.
Gosh, these are so good. I'm making mental notes as we
Oh, thank you.
talk, because one of the things that my mind went to right away is so much of the activities that we do with our kids as it relates to things that are really visible to them.
Yeah.
I mean, I do in my conscious moments, like talk to my children about how much I love them, irrespective of whatever feeling they're having or
Yeah.
whatever mood they're in or whatever they're still really young, 4
Yeah.
and 2, but at least with my 4-year-old, I always reinforce, doesn't matter if you're happy or sad, excited or mad, I love you through every emotion.
Yeah. I love that.
But what you are saying is, when even in my own home and other people's home, you always see the charts that like measure their height and they're like
Yeah.
physically tracking how tall their child is getting, or their weight, or their shoe size, or
Yeah.
you have all these markers of like
Yeah.
physical growth, but where's the emotional markers to track like
Yeah.
the emotional growth?
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, I love that the distinction you made. Yeah, it's like we're only kind of paying attention to the outward facing things that we can see, right?
Mm,
But it's calling out their inner goodness that I
mm,
think is just a little bit, we're not maybe doing quite enough of that. And I also want to say that for people who want to do this, for parents who are like, ooh, this sounds like something I want to do,
mm,
I want to just encourage you to be really gentle with yourself if it feels weird, if it feels
mm,
awkward. Because I think if you didn't grow up with this sort of like celebratory like nature of like, validating your kids and calling out specific things you love about them, it might feel a little bit weird and a little awkward. So I think about like the first time I apologized to my child, I was like, oh my God, I don't like this. Like it was just like this, like I wish this felt better, but I don't like
yeah.
it. It felt very foreign and like weird. And so when we're doing new things like this, just because it feels foreign and weird doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just means like it's
Mm.
new, right? It's just we're getting on a bike, we're learning to ride it, and we're gonna fall off. I know that's a corny analogy, but it's okay. I don't want you to like give up because it feels a little bit odd.
Yeah, that's so great. Shelly, where can people find you if they want to connect with you and learn
Yeah.
more and get access to all the incredible materials and tools you've put together?
Well, I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook, raising_yourself on Instagram and raising yourself on Facebook. And then I have a website that's shellyrobinson.com, and all of my resources, free resources, paid resources, anything you want is on there. My newest free resource is an audio file that is an antidote to your inner critic, something we just talked about today. It's just 5 minutes of me encouraging you and reminding you of like your own goodness and asking you to celebrate your own wins and just kind of getting you in the headspace of like knowing that you're awesome and you're doing great and focusing on where you're doing really well as a parent, because that's not what we tend to focus on, right?
Yeah, something we could all do with a little bit more of. Yeah. Well, Shelly, thank you so much for talking to me. I loved having you on the
Thank
show, and I
you.
so appreciate everything you shared. I know I'm walking away from today with so many tangible tools and tips and tricks that I get to add to
Thank
my
you.
toolkit, and I'm sure others will as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.